Thank you. Welcome to everyone to our evening with Jeff Halper on the situation in Gaza and what comes next. I feel it very sad that we are having to have this meeting this evening. I hardly dare turn on the radio, certainly dare not turn on the television without a lot of hesitation. And of course, when we all do, the news is terrible and unbelievable. I feel that as we're working our way through Advent and looking towards Christmas and the birth of the Christ child, who came to bring peace and love, this is so appalling. The world is, it seems to me, worse than I've ever known it. And it seems that we're letting God down, really, in the world we are living in and allowing to continue in this way. And so my hope of this evening is that we will be given resources to pray and to do much more to bring love where we are and peace and harmony in our world. We have to be dedicated to that, people of all faiths everywhere. We are this evening 3 networks coming together for this talk. The Justice and Peace Network, the National Justice and Peace Network, is one group. Christians Aware is another group. And the third group is the Israeli Committee Against House Demolition. Sorry, my voice. This is a wonderful group. We will learn more about it. And Linda Ramsden, who is the director of ICAHD in the UK, is going to introduce Jeff to us. Thank you, Linda.
Right, thank you. Thank you, Barbara. It really is wonderful to be here this evening, to see so many faces, people who've joined us from the UK and other countries as well. But for me, it's special to be collaborating with Barbara again, because we go back more than 20 years when we were working with the Rediscovering Palestine Network, which purpose was to raise the whole issue of Palestine in the UK. But This is the first time now that we have come across the National Justice and Peace Network. So that's exciting. I want to just say a couple of things as we move toward introducing Jeff. One is that ICAHD UK has always been very keen to get to know other organizations, other networks, to work collaboratively with them. We believe this is really important as we seek to mobilize civil society, educating them, equipping them to help put pressure on our governments and people of influence in order to bring about the changes that we want to see for a better, more peaceful, more just world. For those who don't know ICAHD, Jeff is a co-founder of it. It was founded in Jerusalem in 1997. Its focus for mobilization has been Israel's demolition of Palestinian homes done in violation of the 4th Geneva Convention. So over the years, we've focused on that. You know, before this latest bombardment of Gaza, the war on Gaza began, we were quoting 60,000 Palestinian homes demolished by the Israeli authorities, as I said, in violation of the Geneva Convention. And this is since 1967. But then you look at the more than 60,000 homes that were demolished in the first years that Israel existed. We've heard about the Nakba in 48 and the then nearly 600 Palestinian towns, villages, and agricultural communities that were destroyed. So when we look at this big picture, we're looking at ethnic cleansing, and settler colonialism. And we'll see Jeff may touch on these issues during his talk. And for this focus that ICAHD has had, we have rebuilt 189 Palestinian homes as acts of nonviolent resistance, bringing Israelis and Palestinians together, demonstrating that they refuse to be enemies. So, you know, there is a way forward. And ICAHD itself has done more than look at home demolitions, because it's had a political agenda as well, looking at the elements required for there to be a just and sustainable peace for the people who live between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean Sea. And over the years, we have concluded that the best way forward is for there to be a one democratic state. And certainly since 2017, Jeff has been part of a steering committee for the One Democratic State campaign, which is led by Palestinians. So here in the UK, we represent ICAHD with its information, its analysis. We are part of campaigns, as said, and we lobby and work with other organizations. So again, it's wonderful to see all of you. Now, Jeff himself was born in the States. He's a long-term activist. He was involved with the civil rights movement in America. He trained as an anthropologist. He taught in Central America, in the United States, and in Israel itself. He is an author. His two latest books are War Against the People, Zionism, the Palestinians, and Global Pacification. And this one, Decolonizing Israel, Liberating Palestine, Zionism, Settler Colonialism, and the Case for One Democratic State, which has also been translated into Arabic. So that book is also available. So Jeff Halper, being an activist, an author, an analyst, he was nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize in 2006, along with Palestinian academic Ghassan Andoni. So that reflects this continuous work of Israeli Jews working with Palestinians. So Jeff is much sought after by the media and has been in great demand over these last few weeks as well. Today, he also spoke to a class at Exeter University. And so we'll see what he will bring us this evening when he speaks to the theme, The Horrors of Gaza. What next? Jeff, over to you. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Linda. Thank you, Barbara. Thanks to Matt for doing the technical part of this, and to all of you for joining. Many of you, I haven't gone over the whole list, probably know me and probably have heard me 5 times. So at any point you want me to mute, just let me know. You know, it's hard times here and everywhere. The Gaza, the horrors of Gaza, as the title is, have really reverberated all over the world. I mean, it's become a global tragedy in a sense, not simply a localized event like a lot of the other ones are. And I want to talk about it a little bit and talk about, well, you see, ICAHD, our organization, the Israeli Committee Against House Demolitions, has a very special kind of a niche. Let me start with this so you'll see where I'm coming from and what I can contribute. And that is that, you know, you have Palestinian voices, many Palestinian voices that are explaining what's happening from their point of view. You have Middle East Eye, you have the Palestine Chronicle. I mean, I don't want to list all the Palestinian outlets, but there are strong Palestinian voices. And at the same time, you have the regular news, you've got the BBC, and you have some alternative news networks that also talk about it. You also have Jewish voices that are very critical. Independent Jewish voices in the UK, Jews for a free Palestine, that's not exactly the right word, that you have there as well. Jewish Voice for Peace in the United States. So there's a strong critical Jewish voice. As a matter of fact, Jewish Voice for Peace, which is the largest organization of young Jews in the United States, has declared itself formally an anti-Zionist organization.
The second find is Edward Walsh.
So there's all these voices out there, including, of course, the mainstream media. Where we, I think, play a certain role is that we're kind of a bridge. On the one hand, myself and others in ICAHD here are Israelis. We live here. We're part of the society, part of the community. We know the politics. In a sense, from inside, we know where Israel's going. We know what the decision-making is like, what the different disagreements are. In other words, we can interpret what's going on from an Israeli point of view, which is something that most of the other groups can't do. And the other Israeli groups that could do that are very mainstream. We're one of the only either anti-Zionist, or I prefer to say anti-colonial Israeli organizations exist. So our voice is unique, but at the same time, we're also, like Linda says, on the ground in the Palestinian areas, building homes, working with families. Tomorrow I'll be with a family near Hebron that's being attacked constantly by settlers whose home has been demolished twice. But not only in the occupied territory, we have to understand that this is part of the one state idea, is that we're not only talking about occupation since 1967, we're talking about a settler colonial enterprise that began 130 years ago, but came to fruition in 1948. So that we can't really separate the occupation from what happens inside Israel. So in some years, there are more demolitions of Palestinian homes inside Israel, of Palestinian citizens of Israel, than there are in the occupied territory. So when I say we're with the Palestinians on the ground, I mean not only in the occupied territory, but also inside Israel. And so that kind of a combination of being Israelis, deeply embedded in Israel, that have the ability to interpret what Israel is doing and what Israelis are thinking, but nevertheless being able to understand the wider picture, the wider context, from the point of view of what Israel has done to the Palestinians and how the Palestinians are reacting and what their aspirations are. That, I think, is a combination that's fairly unique. And that's in a sense, that's sort of a niche or a space that I'm trying to fill tonight. So I'll talk for a little while, but I really like to leave most of the time for discussion, questions, discussions, comments, as much as we can do that on this kind of a format. It's not easy to be a critical Israeli sitting here in this time of what's happening in Gaza. I was just watching the news now. For the Israelis, the soldiers are heroes. And 10 soldiers. There was a whole ambush, and 10 soldiers fell today on the battlefield in Gaza. And you see their families, and you see the funerals, and their soldiers and their heroes, but from my point of view, I mean, I have all the compassion for the individuals that died, but from my point of view, they're war criminals. I mean, what's happening in Gaza is not only a war crime and a crime against humanity, it's also a part of, and we've had this in our ICAHD statement, it's also part of a genocidal process. And we have to bring the term genocide in. I think what's happening in Gaza rises to the level of genocide. In other words, it's way beyond retaliation for the horrific attack that happened on October 7th, not to deny that. But nevertheless, the collective punishment against the Palestinian people, the scale of destruction in Gaza, more than half the housing in Gaza is gone. It's really an uninhabitable territory, which is going to raise the question that we'll get into a little later. Is this what Israelis are calling, people in the government are calling Nakba 2? This is an opportunity to get 2 million Palestinians out of Palestine, either into Egypt or abroad, where countries will accept them as refugees with American mediation and so on. And in that way, really significantly advancing Israel's project of ethnically cleansing Palestine. So there's a lot of implications to this whole thing. But, so watching the news, these are heroes defending the country, and everything Israelis see, is through that prism. What you even see on the BBC or on other networks, so you see the humanitarian crisis, you see the scale of destruction in Gaza. You have voices of Palestinians. People are talking to the cameras. You see some of the experiences there. All of that is missing, is completely lacking in the Israeli media. So all you're seeing is our hero soldiers coming in with very graphic, because all the Israeli journalists are embedded with the Israeli army. So very graphic images of soldiers with guns coming in and shooting at Hamas people and taking over neighborhoods and doing all the good things you see that they're doing to defend the country. And again, what's happening on the other side is completely missing. And here I want to say something from within Israeli culture and the Israeli way of looking at things. Do you know, according to the polls, 94% of Israelis support what the Israeli army is doing in Gaza? 94%. I mean, that's almost unheard of. This is an open society. You have universities, you have libraries, you've got every channel on the internet. Half the population travels abroad every year. With all of that access to knowledge and to what's happening and to other TV channels, for example, 94% of the people agree that this war crime in Gaza is a good thing, is not a good thing, a necessary thing for the defense of the country, which means then that something weird is going on. There's some way in which all this information, the whole world and the context and the history is somehow cut out. And sometimes I feel that Israeli Jews are tourists in their own country because they live within a very small box that's defined by Zionism, if you want to put it that way. In other words, for Israelis, there's no context because you don't want to get into that. So for Israelis, this whole thing began on October 7th. October 7th, that's the start. We have what Israelis call an unprovoked attack by Hamas, in the south. And everything we're doing is retaliation for the bad things these evil, as Yoav Gallant says, our defense minister, these human animals have done to us. So it makes the story very simple. It's very clear. They attacked us and we're responding. And we have to destroy them because they're all evil. So when Antonio Guterres, the UN Secretary General, suggested that, look, there's a context to the attack, Israelis got furious. And matter of fact, the Israeli government has asked for his resignation. Because the minute you talk about a context, you widen the scope of things, all of a sudden, it isn't unilateral. It isn't them attacking us. It's not that we're some peaceful, normal society that's being mugged by criminals. That's the way Israelis see it. But the minute you broaden the scope, you begin to understand the destruction that we've done to the Palestinian people. That's where we talk about genocide as well. It isn't only a genocidal event in Gaza, but since 1948, if you look at what we've done to the Palestinians, the Nakba, as Linda said, 530 or so villages and towns and urban areas destroyed systematically. More than 80% of the Palestinian population driven out of the country, where they still live as refugees in camps. The destruction of their economy, the seizing of their lands, the erasing of their culture here, and really imposing an apartheid system so that today Israel is in control of 85% of historic Palestine, and the Palestinian population that's still in this country, which is equal to the Jewish population. They're about 7 million each. The 7 million Israeli Jews are living on 85% of the country with freedom of movement and citizenship and a prosperous economy and European standards of living, while the 7 million Palestinians are locked into about 185 little tiny islands and enclaves, disconnected, impoverished, with no citizenship, no civil rights, no human rights whatsoever, no protection of an army or a police force from the settlers or from the Israeli soldiers, on 15% of their country. So that, what we've done to the Palestinians is the systematic destruction of a people and their dispossession from their land, which amounts to genocide. The definition of genocide is the destruction in part or in whole of a people. And certainly that's what we've done. But you see, to understand that, to take that into account, to put Hamas and in general Palestinian resistance and in general Palestinian aspirations, to put that into the picture means that you have to be able to kind of sit back and see what you've done, understand your own history, your own actions. And that Israelis refuse to do because it's too threatening, you see. And so in order to keep this stance where we're right and they're wrong, we're human and they're animals, which is classical colonial language. You dehumanize and criminalize the colonized. Every colonial society did that. In order to do that, you have to begin the story on October 7th. You have to cut out and deny and vehemently deny any context, any political context, and any responsibility that you do. So that's an important way to begin this discussion, you see, because if you're in that mindset, which is true of, again, 94% of Israelis, which includes people on the Zionist left, intellectuals, that's why you can explain it like that, because they all live within this certain box, and it's all a Zionist box. So voices like ours that are critical have no resonance whatsoever inside Israel. Even if I would manage to get onto Israeli TV, no one would understand a word I'm saying because it's so much outside of the bounds of what they're used to hearing. I mean, even the term settler colonialism, they've never heard. So when you're saying about, the tragedy of Gaza, the horrors of Gaza, when we're talking about that, that is simply not part of the way the Israelis are looking at this. And so, we have to, look at it from that point of view. So from the Israeli point of view, there's very little to report. Everything is going fine. Our troops are advancing faster than we had expected. They're encountering resistance, fierce resistance, but they're overcoming it. Unfortunately, we're losing quite a few soldiers, something like, if you include October 7th, something like 600 soldiers have died, and there's more than 1,500 that are wounded. So this isn't a cost-free kind of a thing. We don't even talk about how many Palestinians have died. That's the foreign news that reports that. The suffering of the Palestinians, again, what's happening on the other side of the destruction is off the table. And so from that point of view, it's a very technical kind of reporting that Israel has. This is how far we're advanced. This is the price we're paying. This is how well we're doing in terms of destroying Hamas. And the big challenge in front of us is to hold off the Americans long enough that we can finish this process. The Americans would like this to finish, by the end of the month. It's not going to finish by the end of the month. And here, we have to understand something else, and that is that Israel really has a free hand. There's nobody that can stop Israel. You say, well, Israel's this little state. It's a client state of the United States. It gets $3.4 billion a year in arms from the United States. Since October 7th, Israel's gotten 10,000 tons of army materiel, of army supplies from the United States. So what do you mean the United States can't tell Israel to end the fighting at the end of the month? Because Biden is very concerned for his election that this humanitarian crisis is getting out of control. And Israel is protected because it has Congress in its pocket. In other words, it can thumb its nose at a president. Presidents will change, and Biden is likely to change in another year. But Congress remains firmly pro-Israel. Republicans, 100%. The Democrats in the younger generation are starting to shift a bit, but still the vast majority of the Democratic Party is very pro-Israel. And that gets back, Kissinger used to say that all politics are local. So it gets back to wanting to get reelected and public opinion in the US and so on. So Israel, in a sense, is in this strange situation of carrying out what everybody in the world sees as a war crime. I mean, in a few days ago, in the Security Council, when every country in the world voted for ceasefire, except the United States and Britain that abstained, right? Even with all of that, with all the pressure, nobody can stop Israel. And that's really, I think, a commentary on the way the world works. And let me just say, I don't want to go on too long about this, but Barbara asked the question, especially at Christmas, why can't we make the world a better place? Why is it such an awful place in a sense? Why can't our values of love and compassion and justice and peace and so on, why don't they have more of a role to play in the way the world is run? And I'll leave you with this thought, and Gaza will get back to in questions, because then it'll be a little more focused when you ask me things that are on your mind. But I just want to say that the world is run, we all know this, but we haven't really thought about it enough. And I think it's something we have to kind of explore. The world is run in a transactional manner. Certainly since, I would say, certainly since Trump, who was the epitome of transactional international relations, but even before to some degree. In other words, international politics, if you look at Kissinger, was always power-based, realistic politics, and but nevertheless, even in Kissinger's world, there was a vision of what the future should be. It might be the American century, it might not be the vision we share, but there was a political vision, there was a strategy, there were alliances, and in some ways they were values. We valued freedom, we valued countries that were democratic. A lot of that was, as we know, kind of nonsense, but nevertheless, there was the lip service to all of that. All that's gone. And think about Trump, but Biden and everybody else now is in this transactional mode where everything is a deal. Everything is a deal. In other words, everything is transactional, instrumental. There are no values. Nobody pretends there's values. I mean, Biden gives lip service, Biden's an old man, so maybe he remembers from the Kissinger days. He talks about the rule-based international order or human rights. But those are, in a transactional world, you don't want an international rule. You don't want the UN. You don't want other bodies telling you what to do, because everything has to be in your interests. You're an individual actor. The United States is acting alone. It has no friends. It has no alliances. It has interests, right? And you make deals with France or with Britain or with China or with who's in the same mindset, basically. So in this kind of a world, then, first of all, everything we talk about as people, again, compassion, justice, peace, and so on, have no role to play whatsoever. Jimmy Carter was laughed out of office, in the middle 70s by Reagan and these guys, by wanting to put human rights as one guiding post to American international relations. So that doesn't play a role. And instead, we have a world in which, again, in which everything's a deal. So who's at the table? Who makes deals? It's only players that have some resources. If you're a strong country economically, or like Israel, if you have a military technology, you have a military know-how, prowess, that you can make available to the national community. You have a Palestinian laboratory where you can develop and test weapons. You have a Gaza where all kinds of new weaponry is being, combat tested as we speak. That's a resource. Or you have oil, or you have some geopolitical advantage. Whatever it is, that resource gets you to the table. And now you can wheel and deal with the others. The oppressed peoples of the world, in which we can include the Palestinians, don't have those resources. They have no resources. Or they have resources, many of them, but they're looted by the global north. They have no control over, Iraq has a lot of oil, but Iraq has no control over its own oil. So what I'm trying to get at is, in this transactional world, it's only the powerful, the states and corporations, that are talking to each other. And Israel's a part of that gang. Whereas people like Palestinians, or people, again, that are oppressed, that need considerations of justice and compassion and so on, and equality, because that's all they have to offer, are ignored because they have nothing to bring to the transactional game. And so in a sense, there's a disconnect between ourselves as people, where some of us are religious, some of us come from a human rights direction, some of us come from whatever our values are. We have values. So when we talk about international politics, sometimes we're patriotic a little bit, more or less, but we also think about others. And we think about justice, and we think about, wouldn't the world be better with peace, or wouldn't the world be better? Just had the COP conference now on climate change. Well, again, the people wanted an end to fossil fuels. The governments, especially the Arab governments, said, no, we don't want that, because fossil fuels is our economy. So where there's a disconnect. Governments work on this transactional, power-based, me first basis, whereas we, the people, work on a more of a value basis. And so how it becomes almost impossible. This is something we should talk about and strategize about. How do we manage, that are outside of this political system, how do we, the people, manage to insert our values or insert our priorities into the political process? It's really very difficult because it's a closed process to us, and it's even a closed process to less powerful states, let alone just being people like we are that aren't really in politics. So this, I think, is a background to Gaza, and it explains why with 300,000 people in the streets of London, with people, an outpouring all over the world for Palestinian rights. Israel has a free rein to do anything it wants to do. Europe, Britain, the United States will all support it. The Arab countries want to go back to normalization. And that's the way it is. So one more thing. I'm sorry, one more thing, just to finish this up. And that is then that what Israel wants and what Britain wants and what the United States and the bigger powers want is to go back to the process of normalization. They have much bigger fish to fry than Palestinians. Palestinians are little fish. They're a nuisance, right? They play no role in this power-based transactional world we're talking about, but they have that nuisance factor. You know, what Hamas did was a pretty serious thing, not only on a human level, but a pretty serious thing in terms of they were right on the cusp of signing this deal with Saudi Arabia. Netanyahu was in the UN a week before, October 7th, holding up a map that showed Israel, that included the occupied territories in the new Middle East, and was bragging about how we're just about to sign with Saudi Arabia. Well, that ended, abruptly. We'll see for how long by the Hamas attack. So Palestinians have the ability to disrupt that system, but that's about all. They don't have much ability to take it forward proactively. And so in a sense, what the United States and Europe want is industrial quiet here, so that they can go on with their bigger agendas. They want to counter Iran. The United States and Europe want to counter China. So just before October 7th, a day or two before, Biden announced at the G20 summit the new IMEC initiative, the India Middle East corridor. That would be an alternative corridor to the Road and Belt initiative of the Chinese. That's what's important. Saudi Arabia, the Gulf states, they're trying to become world global economic hubs rather than simply kind of marginal oil nations. For all of that, you need quiet. You need stability, right? You need to somehow stifle, not solve. You can't solve the Palestinian issue because Israel won't allow it. So you have to stifle it. So what's coming down the pipeline, and on this I'll stop. What's coming down the pipeline that we really have to keep our eye on is, and Biden talks about this all the time, when the fighting subsides in Gaza, Biden is going to, with Europe, Macron is on board and the other Europeans, is going to initiate a push for a two-state solution, right? But a two-state solution that has to be approved by Israel. It can't, there's an urgency here. We have to get back to the path of normalization as quickly as we can for the bigger fish. So we don't have time to negotiate. We don't have time for a peace process. What we have to do is impose a two-state solution immediately and get this thing over with so we get this industrial quiet. Well, you can't get into a fight with Israel over settlements. So the quickest way to, and the Palestinians have nothing to offer, and the PA is a collaborationist regime anyway, that's not going to oppose the US or Israel. So the quickest way to do that is through apartheid. In other words, we impose a two-state solution in which that's dictated by Israel, in which you have Israel within the 67 borders, Area C of the West Bank, where all the settlements are, 62% of the West Bank. And again, the Palestinians then locked into these Bantustan islands on the other 15 to 20% of the country. So that's going to be our, in other words, let me end like this. Gaza is very dramatic, and our attention should be focused on Gaza, and it's tragic. But Gaza is not the big story politically, because Gaza is marginal. Israel doesn't need Gaza. It doesn't want Gaza. It's trying to pawn it off to anybody that'll take it. Israel wants the West Bank. It wants to go to the Jordan River. That's the land of Israel, together with Israel itself. That's where the settlements are. And that's where, and some of us know this, it's not reported, you have the soldier and settler violence going on today in the West Bank against the Palestinians. 16 Palestinian villages so far have been abandoned by their inhabitants because of settler-soldier violence against them. So that this is setting, in other words, Israel knows, or Israel's a part of it, this intent to impose this two-state solution. So Israel is clearing Area C of Palestinians in order to be ready to accept this kind of solution, and the Palestinians are out and there's less resistance. So the real political story is actually happening in the West Bank and in this two-state apartheid system that's about to be imposed, rather than actually in Gaza. Gaza is not the main story politically. So I'll shut up at this point and let you guys talk or ask questions.
Thank you so much, Jeff. There's so much in there. Some really interesting comments in the chat already. Can I just ask people if you want to ask a question? If you use the reactions button at the bottom of Zoom, and then there's a bit where it's raise hand, and you can put your hand up, and then it kind of chooses people in order. So that's the easiest way to facilitate discussion. So if you can look for that. If you really can't do that, you can put it in the chat, or yeah, last resort, unmute and we'll come to you. But if you can use the raise hand button at the bottom, that would be really great. If you've got any questions, I'm sure you've got lots.
Hello. Hi, Jeff.
Hello, who's that?
Brian McDonald now.
Hello, Brian.
Yeah, I just want to say that it's difficult to read comments which come up on the screen while the speaker is speaking. It's a kind of split mind problem. May I suggest that people who put up comments on the screen actually now repeat them and speak them so that we can all hear and concentrate on them.
Yeah, lovely idea, Brian. Thank you.
All right.
Yeah, we've got lots of very intelligent and informed people on this call, in addition to the very intelligent Jeff. So yeah, it'd be really good to have other people's comments and thoughts too. So should we go to Frank?
Thank you. Hello, Jeff. So my question is,
Hi, Frank. I was unmuted. Sorry.
yeah, that was I. As I said in the chat, nobody has a corner on religious hypocrisy. So my first question is, how are religious Jews, particularly Orthodox, responding to this? You know, how are they managing to ignore everything in the Torah instructions that are supposed to mitigate against exactly this kind of behavior? But, you know, it also, beyond pointing fingers, we on this webinar, I assume most of us are claiming some kind of allegiance to concepts of justice and righteousness and so on. How do we amplify our voices in order to create some kind of change someplace, somehow?
Right. Well, you know, it depends what Torah you're reading. I mean, we all know how religion can be selective. You know, there's two or more Jewish religious traditions, but let me put it this way. In Israel, the Orthodox look at the Torah. They look basically at the 5 books of Moses, we call them, the first 5 books of the Bible. They don't look at the prophets, certainly. So the whole idea of justice, where all that comes from, Amos and Jeremiah, Isaiah, that's out. They don't look even at Psalms. They just recite as kind of a ritual thing. If you're sick or something, you read Psalms. You don't it doesn't matter what you're reading. So they're looking at the 5 books, and the first 5 books and Joshua are really genocidal books. I mean, they're books that say this land belongs to they're not Jews yet. They're Hebrews, they're Israelites, they're Judeans, whatever they are. It belongs to them, and God gave it to them. And whoa, you wonder where ISIS comes from? Read the book of Joshua sometimes. I mean, the book of Joshua is this, and that was Ben Gurion's favorite book, by the way, a book of conquest and genocide. I mean, God. I mean, you have the 10 Commandments, where one of the commandments is, thou shalt not kill. I don't know if God read the 10 Commandments, because you jump to the book of Joshua, and God's not only saying kill, he's saying destroy every living thing in this whole country of Canaan. The kings, the people, every animal, everything except trees, and that's the Bible that you're reading, you see? So that's reinforcing everything. And that, of course, then feeds into Zionism, because Zionism itself is a national movement. So Zionism took Judaism and made it into a national religion. So the idea of this Judaism, the first 5 books of the Bible and Joshua, then reinforce the Zionist myth, the Zionist narrative. And at the same time, then, when we're engaged in things like Gaza, we simply go back and get all our justification for the fact, what did Netanyahu say a couple of weeks ago? Hamas is Amalek. I mean, we use the biblical context, but in our own selective way. Amalek were the people that tried to prevent Moses and the Israelites from getting into the land of Israel. And they've been made in Jewish theology into basically the devils, Satan, the evil, that they have to be destroyed. You have to. It's a commandment to destroy the Amaleks, and so Israel has created this Palestinian people that have become the Amaleks. So that's that kind of religion. And let me just say that I think the real disconnect between Israel and most Jews abroad, especially in the United States, which is the largest Jewish community, is that Jews abroad take their Judaism, those especially because 85% or so of Jews abroad are not religious in an Orthodox sense, in a religious sense. They take their Jewish values from the prophets that aren't read by the Orthodox or by the Zionists. And the prophets, so social justice, human rights, that becomes the value that feeds into Judaism abroad, whereas it's genocidal nationalism from the book of Joshua and the other books of the Bible that feed into the Zionist part of it. And that's why I think Israel is losing the Jewish community. Some of the most vociferous protests against Israel have been from Jews. At MIT, in Boston, Jewish Voice for Peace was banned from campus because it was so vociferously anti what Israel's doing today. So you have two Judaisms, and I think Israel has really distorted Judaism to a point where it's really unrecognizable to most Jews abroad.
Yeah, thank you. Of course, we in the United States characterize Native Americans and Filipinos as Amalekites. So we've used that same rationale, haven't we?
Other hands?
So
who's calling on people?
We're going to go to David.
Hi, Jeff. David Rosenberg from Jewish Socialist Group.
I know I was going to mention you guys, but I wasn't sure how Jewish you were.
But and I've got 2 or 3 questions, but just to say something before that, which one of the small chinks of light in this really horrible situation is the emergence of a united Jewish bloc on the demos in Britain, which has been, we've always had a small number of Jews involved, but at the moment there's about 9 different organizations coordinating together, and with on the biggest demo, we had a block of around 1,000 in the Jewish block, which was, unprecedented here.
I think Linda and ICAHD UK
Yeah, they've been part of
marched
it.
with your block during
Yeah,
those.
absolutely. No, they've definitely been part of it. But the question I want to ask really is about, because I've myself been trying to focus a bit more on what's happening in the West Bank, and I was interested in what you were saying, that Gaza is marginal, Israel wants the West Bank. But I kind of wanted to press you more on, like, is that Netanyahu's endgame, or is it the far right people that are even beyond Netanyahu? Is it their dream? And how much is the other heads of the army on board with this?
With what's happening in Gaza.
Yeah, well, yeah, and also the plan about the West
Right.
Bank.
Look, it's very strange. The whole Palestinian issue that we talk about, Palestinian national rights, the Palestinian people, a political solution, whatever the solution is, all that is irrelevant to Israelis. They don't care about it. They don't think about it. They don't talk about it. It's for Israelis, the whole Palestinian issue has been reduced to security. Security, our security. In other words, what's going to bring us security? Whatever brings us security is fine. Whether it's 2 states, well, not 1 state, because it has to be Jewish, 10 states, or no state. I think Israelis today are in favor of no solution, because no solution is what we have. The status quo that we have now is perfect. We have the entire country. We rule the entire country from the river to the sea. We build settlements. I mean, nobody even opposes the settlements in any way. There's now 750,000 Israelis living in the occupied Palestinian territory. We're creating facts on the ground. We're very much a part of the international community. We're strategic allies with the United States. We're associates in NATO. I mean, there's nothing wrong with this picture. So, okay, the Palestinian nuisance thing jumps up every few years, and you hit it down again. But in a sense, it's better for Israel not to get into any kind of solution that's going to push it into having to make a decision. Do we have to give up? Now we don't have to give up any territory. We don't have to do anything we don't want to do. So any solution pushes you in a way that you don't want to go. So for Israelis, I think the whole idea of solution, including the government, all the political parties, even Labor, that's gone today, but the Labor Party, when they were in parliament, said this is not the time to talk about solutions. Ehud Barak, who was the last Labor prime minister, said we have to divorce from the Arabs. We don't even call them Palestinians. We call them Arabs in a very generic way because we don't accept the idea of Palestinian peoplehood, right? So that at best we want to divorce. We just don't want to see him again. Tonight, these 10 soldiers were killed in a neighborhood of Gaza City called Sajaria. Sajaria is a part of Gaza City that's visible from the part of Israel where the Hamas attack took place. So now the discussion of the government is, all right, we're destroying Sajaria in order to get at the Hamas people, right? But once it's cleared out or cleaned out in military parlance, the idea is we're going to raise it. We're going to destroy it to the ground so that when the people go home into that part of Israel, they don't even have to see it again. That's the Israeli idea, not of peace, but of the future. A world in which we do whatever we want to do. This country is ours. We don't see Arabs, and we live in security. So the person, Netanyahu ran for office with the slogan, peace with security. So that's the common basis. And as long as Israelis feel that Hamas is against their security, or the PA is against their security, or dismantling settlement, whatever's against their security, they're opposed to. And the whole issue of Palestinian rights and peace and justice and all that, that's irrelevant for Israelis. And that's why it's so hard to get through to the Israeli public, because, you know, they're just not, that's not really what concerns them. It's issues of security. And of course, you can't convince people in any way today that living with Arabs is going to bring you security. And so even if that's where I go back to the two-state apartheid idea that we have to be careful of, because any two-state solution that Israel might possibly accept, you know, as a price for getting back to normalization with the Arab countries, has to be a two-state solution, again, in which Israel keeps its settlements. And for security reasons, Israel controls the borders, which means the Palestinian state, whatever little state it is, will not be sovereign. It won't have control of its own borders. Israel controls the airspace. Israel controls the electromagnetic sphere. These are all things that are talked about, which means communications. And so in this exaggerated security idea, that is the future. That's what defines the future. Security, there is no place for any kind of a sovereign, viable Palestinian state. And of course, there's no place for one democratic state, because then that wouldn't be Jewish. So that all the options are foreclosed. You can't have two states because that's apartheid. You can't have one state because it's not Jewish. And so the best thing is what we're doing now. We have our security. All right, once in a while, something happens like October 7th. But basically, we've got our security. We've got the Palestinians under control. There's thousands of CCTV cameras, surveillance systems, all through the West Bank, and drones over Gaza. Israel produces 40% of the world's drones. So that the idea is we can keep control of the Palestinians, either as a Bantustan state or in this state of constant and not a sort of constant conflict. But also I want to just throw in one tiny little thing, and that is that, you know, the Palestinian laboratory we're talking about, the West Bank, especially in Gaza as well. On the West Bank, Israel perfects its technologies of control, surveillance in particular, and all kinds of policing tactics. In Gaza, where you have bigger conflicts that emerge, that erupt, that's where Israel tests its drones, artillery, all kinds of other measures that are much harsher. AI targeting systems. For example, Israel now has a platform where AI, you know, it used to be that the intelligence had to put together data and build a bank of targets in Gaza, what we should be attacking. Now they have AI. Everything goes into AI, and AI generates more targets per day than the Israeli Air Force and Army can attack. So with that kind of technology, you see, Israel isn't afraid of any really of the security thing. I think part of the reason for this attack on Gaza is that the military was humiliated when Hamas broke through. And in order to retain their market status, in order to sell these weapons and to convince customers again that these weapons are effective, they've got to really destroy Hamas and show how effective the weaponry is. So you're caught in that kind of a military security kind of a mindset, and that's what determines things for Israelis and for the Israeli government. And that's why no solution will be acceptable to Israel. So in our one-state idea, and we won't get into that right now, the idea is really to replicate what the ANC did and assume that the Israelis are not going to be partners in any genuine attempt to bring some kind of a just peace to this conflict. And therefore, we have to bypass the Israelis, like the ANC bypassed the whites in South Africa, and go to you guys. Go to the international community that does support the Palestinians and together begin to build a movement around a political program. That's the short answer.
Right, we'll go to Curtis.
Yes. Hello, Jeff, and thanks very much for this devastating analysis of our current world system. It's terrible, terrible, terrible. And I just wonder what your thoughts are on changing it. Here we have climate change, we have the threat of a nuclear war, we have massive inequality, we have human rights violated all over the world. What can we, which seems like the world's people, how and what approaches can be taken to change this system towards one that really works for us?
Well, that's the big question, and that gets back to that transactional disconnect that I was talking about, because the political system not only isn't open to that, it doesn't make any sense to the people in power, certainly corporations. You know, I mean, I see some young people here, but a lot of us are of a certain age. And we remember back in the 60s, certainly, where the word was organize. You have to organize. You have to have a political program, you have to have political analysis, and you have to organize in order to create alternative centers of power, whether it's voting power or shaming power, or, you know, like the civil rights movement, you know, powers of numbers that politicians can't ignore, and push your agenda. Today, I think, you know, what's happened is, and I think it's because of neoliberalism, where young people feel very disempowered. I mean, it's a whole system they don't control. They're all part of a neoliberal capitalist system that all that leaves them are to be consumers, but they're being excluded. Not only the global South is excluded, but our own kids. Our own kids will not have the standard of living that we had. You know, they can't get houses, they have no job security. You know, I cut them a lot of slack why they're not thinking politically, because they're so concerned with how am I going to raise a family? You know, how am I going to keep working, have an income? I mean, that insecurity that's built into the neoliberal system, that's a political tool, because it prevents people from organizing. You just don't have the space and the time to organize because, you know, because you're so concerned. You know, I might give an hour, I might give a Saturday to a demonstration, but that's about it. Otherwise, I got to deal with myself. And neoliberalism is all about me. So I think, you know, what's happened because of this is that politics in the younger generation has become like Black Lives Matter. It's become a movement that doesn't really have a political agenda. It's a kind of a movement around principles, values, and then it's expressed in these big rallies. You know, even like the rallies in London, but, you know, rallies all over for certain things, even for climate change rallies and so on. You do that, and then you know, it's ephemeral, because then it all dissipates, and there's no demand. In a sense, it's not political. I think the climate change people are different. I think they are engaging. Yeah, I mean, they were at the COP conference, you know, the organizations, Greenpeace and all the different organizations, and they are involved in the nitty-gritty of developing treaties and statements and this and that, and they're watchdogs, and they do mobilize people, but they mobilize in a very focused sort of a way. They're almost the only movement that does that. You know, all our other movements are very much based on social movements and mass mobilization, but without specific political goals. And, you know, the left is very siloed, as we all know. So the people in climate change don't talk to the people, the anti-war people, and they don't talk to the women's rights people, and they don't talk to the third world debt people. And, you know, so we have all these silos, and we don't have, if you think about it, we don't have real think tanks or forums. We used to have the World Social Forum, and that collapsed years ago. You know, we don't have even forums to come together with our different issues. So I think organization is around, political issues that are interconnected is the way that we can translate our different causes into political power. But that's not the way, in my view, at least, the younger generation is moving. And so, all right, you have a big demonstration, and the politicians know that everybody will go home, and that's sort of the end of it in a way. I don't know, maybe that's too hard, and all you young people can push back at me.
Thank you. We've got about 15 minutes left, so my suggestion is that we've got like 4 people with their hands up. We take all 4 and then go back to you, Jeff, if that's okay, just so that we can make sure we have everybody have the opportunity to say something if they've got their hands up. So we've got Juliana first.
Thank you. Hi, Jeff. I wanted to ask, what is the role of the Israeli peace activist in the plan you discussed before about the 2 states as a normalization apartheid? Because I'm wondering what's happening in terms of the Israeli peace movement, because in the UK, what I've seen the Standing Together group kind of getting organized and linked with some more of the local groups here. But I think as far as I understand, they mostly advocate a 2-state solution. So I wonder if they are proposing a 2-state solution of a different kind, or if it's a more generic move and they kind of arrive first in the UK. So and the others are not as powerful in getting heard or something like that. So are they proposing a critical 2-state or more of the one like you were discussing before?
Okay.
Yeah. We're going to go to Janine. Don't think you're Janine, you're somebody else, Roy, aren't you?
Hello?
Hello, go for it.
Yeah, my question was very short. I just wondered how the extremist settler violence against Palestinians and the destruction of homes was viewed by the majority of the 94% that you mentioned as supporting the Israeli general picture. To what extent is there any criticism within that 94% of the extremist settler actions?
Thank you. And we're going to go to Flavia.
Yes, hi. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, hi. So I have a question about the Arabs that are integrated in Israel. I think there is 1.8 million Arabs who are part of Israeli society.
That's right.
And I never understood how they're there. I mean, were they not chased out with the rest? Why? And what do they do? What's their role in all this?
Right.
How does it feel?
Thank you, Flavia. And we're getting more people with their hands up, as you could expect at the end of the talk, but we'll keep going. Linda.
Well, I won't ask the question I have then because others want to ask, except I have seen in the chat line, Norma put something in about how Israel is targeting places of, cultural centers as well, where thought, stimulation, creativity is being targeted, thinking of in Bethlehem and in Jenin. And if you would say more too on the masses, global South, a lot is coming from the global South that we're hearing. Are they going to be powerful enough to put pressure on Western countries?
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you, Linda. And we'll just take the last 2 that've got their hands up. I'm sorry, that's a lot of questions in one, Jeff, but the only way we can get within our time. Susan. You're on mute still, Susan.
Can't be heard.
Need to unmute Susan.
Susan, unmute.
Okay, here, sorry. It's great to see you, Jeff and Linda. Since I was in Palestine with you all, my feeling, I'm Marxist, and you know, I really believe that the way people think is the ideology of the ruling class, so that the values that we've been talking about are values that come from exactly what you said, neoliberalism and individualism. I think something's shifting in the US, and I'm so pleased because the anti-Zionist movement in America, I'm in JVP, I've been in for years, and is becoming quite more multi-issued than it had been before. And masses of people of color are coming to these things. The organization that JVP and If Not Now are doing is extraordinary. Every other day there's a demonstration and a lot of pressure on Congress. I just wanted to throw that in. God knows whether, the end of capitalism is imperialism, and destruction of the land and the people are part of it.
Thank you, Susan. And we're going to go to the final hand up, which is Colin.
Colin.
Unmute, Colin. Unmute. You're still on mute, Colin.
Towards the bottom of the screen.
Bottom left of the screen. Oh, sorry, I just unmuted you again. Do it again. Yes.
Yes, thank you, Jeff, for a great talk. Many years ago, Arafat begged the United Nations to send a peacekeeping force to protect the Palestinians from being destroyed completely. Even then, it was obvious to him that that was what the aim was of Ben Gurion, etc. Do you think there's any hope of the General Assembly voting for such a move to put a United Nations peacekeeping force into Palestine, the West Bank? As you say, I think the West Bank is the real target, and that's something which we could deal with rapidly if they allowed them in. Do you think that the actual Israeli army would actually fight a United Nations force being landed on their territory?
Not their territory, but okay.
Over to you, Jeff.
All right, so I'll try to do this as briefly as I can. Brevity is my specialty. All right. In terms of the peace activists in Israel, my community, in a way, it's very. There are very few peace activists in the anti-Zionist, or even if you don't want to call yourself anti-Zionist, in this critical camp. I mean, there's almost no other organization except ICAHD. There's a few activists, but it's very, very few, because the Israeli peace movement very much reflects Israel. I mean, these are Israelis that have been brought up here, and in many ways they also don't see the wider picture. A lot of them are students, or they're working or whatever. They're not academics. They don't necessarily read books, or they don't have analyses or whatever. And so they tend to be reactive. I mean, that goes back to the idea of what we talked about before in terms of organization. I mean, a lot of activists today are just that. They're activists. And activists are very reactive. So they'll go to Sheikh Jarrah. But again, you get the neoliberal part of it. And that is, I'll be an active, you know, in the 60s, we used to talk about commitment. So suckers like me, you know, end up working 24, or Linda, or some of you, the others of you we work 24 hours a day. Nobody pays us. We're doing statements and whatever, and we're organizing. That's not the case of most peace activists today. They'll give you an hour. They'll go to Sheikh Jarrah every Friday at 4 o'clock, and they'll beat their drums and they'll fight the police, and then they go home. And don't talk to me during the week because I have other things to do. That might be an over characterization, but in a sense, it's a protest movement. They're very much into protest and slogans and so on. So there isn't a concern, and that's a problem. Look, we have every year an alternative Independence Day. You know, on Independence Day, we all the left gets together in a parking lot, the Bank of Israel parking lot in Jerusalem. That holds, with room, the entire Israeli left, pretty much. Okay. And I've gone every year for years. Sometimes I speak. But in the last few years, I've been going with our One Democratic State leaflets to talk about, you know, and my people, the people I've been working with for 50 years or more, are horrified with the idea of one state. What are you talking about? First of all, security. And second of all, it's not a Jewish state anymore. What are you? So they're committed. The best they can do is a two-state solution. But they don't really go into the details. Does two-state mean keeping the Male Adumim settlement? What are the borders? What is a viable? All these questions you have to ask of the two-state, they don't want to ask. They're like other Israelis. They're liberal. They want the best for Arabs or for Palestinians, of course. But that's it. You know, they're not going to commit themselves to a political program. They're not going to invest their time. And that's what makes them really a kind of irrelevant in a sense. I mean, they're like gadflies. You know, every Friday you go out, it's not in the paper. You don't deliver anything. You don't promise anything. You don't change anything. I mean, it's nice that they're out there. You know, the Tayush group, for example, does very good work in the South Hebron Hills. Rabbis for Human Rights does great work, and Arik Asherman's group, Tekoa does a very good work with the Bedouins, very important work, and others do. They're with the Palestinians and kind of a protection force. Without a UN protection force, they're a protection force. Their solidarity, I'm not minimizing that at all, but none of these groups have any political agenda. I mean, it's going to go on forever, and their children will be doing the same thing, and their grandchildren, if there's any Palestinians left, will be doing the same thing. So the Israeli left is not thinking about or organizing around or interested in a political solution and organizing around it. And that's, I think, the fatal weakness, because we're completely irrelevant as any kind of a political force, unfortunately. In terms of settler violence, really quickly, you know, again, it's, you know, I mean, if you ask Israelis, of course they don't like it, but they don't know about it. It's not really on TV. Maybe once in a while, there might be a little something. It's not an issue, and people really don't care. I mean, it's outside of their sphere of interest. So there's no real criticism. I mean, Israelis don't like settlers very much. If you're talking about the settlers being the Smotrich Ben Gvir kind, these violent settlers that are religious, the Israelis don't like them very much. And they wouldn't care if those settlements were disbanded. What we have to remember is 80% of what we call settlers are in fact not settlers in any ideological sense. The people that live in Male Adumim, which is one of the largest settlements, or Ariel, or Modi'in, or whatever, are simply normal people that the government, you know, the government subsidizes housing, and it gets young people and working class people that otherwise would struggle to get a home and better the standard of living. They get subsidized housing. and a very good infrastructure and good education. And that's what attracts them, not the ideology. So the people in Ma'ale Adumim don't see themselves as settlers at all. Matter of fact, there was even a branch of Meretz, the left-wing Zionist party in Ma'ale Adumim. They don't see any contradiction. So for them, the settlers are these religious, violent people in these small little settlements deep in Palestinian areas. Israelis don't like them, and they wouldn't care if they were dismantled, but they're really not an issue. They're not, so they do what they do, and nobody, it's up to, basically, let me put it this way, everything that happens to Arabs is up to the army. If the army wants to protect Palestinians and keep the settlers from attacking them, great, that's what they should be doing. If the army, what it's doing is recruiting the settlers into the army. There's a special unit called Desert Frontier that's comprised of religious settlers, the Hilltop Youth, that with guns and uniforms are now going into Palestinian communities and driving people out. It's not an issue in Israel. Whatever happens over there is over there. We don't see it. We don't care about it. And as long as it doesn't hurt our security, let the army deal with it. That's the way. Israelis have no responsibility, take no responsibility for what happens. The third question, I have here written 150,000. What was that in reference to? All right, I'll come back to that. Wait, that was maybe Julia's question? All right, we'll come back to that. The issue of attacking artists in Gaza, destroying artists' compounds, killing artists. One very well-known Palestinian artist, a woman, was killed. A week or so ago. It's not only attacking cultural places. Israel dynamited. There was a very dramatic picture, and bombed and dynamited the Palestinian Supreme Court in Gaza. In other words, all the institutions that represent the Palestinians politically or culturally are erased, are destroyed. And that's part of the war. The message is Israel's always passing messages to Palestinians. And the message is, the message is clear. And the message has been clear for years of Israel towards the Palestinians. They're saying, and now they're saying it with the army in Gaza, you have three choices, you Arabs. You have three choices. You can submit to us. You can submit. You can, and that relates to the question before, and now I remember. So you can submit, and you can, admit or accept that you're living in a Jewish state, and we'll let you live. We'll let you stay here. That's basically, the question was about the Palestinian citizens of Israel that we call the Israeli Arabs. Where are they in this whole thing? In a sense, they've submitted because they were such a small community, they had no choice. In 1948, when 750,000 Palestinians were driven out of the country, more than 80% of the population, the Arab population, about 150,000 remained. They remained, they didn't get everybody out. So 150,000 remained, and they were so small, all their lands were taken. They were put under a very strict military government from 1948 to 1966. And then in 1967, when the occupation occurred, that whole military government with all its policies, its bureaucracy, its officials, its structures, were all simply moved in total into the West Bank and Gaza. So, you had a ready-made occupation. And the 1.5 million or so Palestinian citizens of Israel today are the descendants of them. And in a sense, without really choice, they've chosen to submit. And that's, it's very hard to get them to talk about one state or even to engage with the occupation, because they know that their remaining in Israel with civil rights, basic civil rights, is very tenuous. And so, they're always seen as a fifth column, and they're very careful. So right now they're keeping their heads down. Hundreds have been fired from their jobs. Hundreds of students have been expelled from the universities because of Facebook posts. And, they're really scared. But the point I'm trying to make then, if just to go back, is that that's an example of submitting. So that's the first thing. So Israel's saying to the people of Gaza, if you submit, but they're not going to submit. All right. So what's the second option? If you don't submit, get out. Get out. You're free to, you're in a prison, but the back door is open. Now, that's true of the West Bank and East Jerusalem. They can go to Jordan, and they are. There is an out-migration of any middle-class Palestinian that wants a future is getting out. So there is a certain ethnic cleansing, a kind of induced migration. You can't do that in Gaza. There's no way to get out. You're trapped in Gaza. So if you submit, get out, or you die. Those are the stark options. And what I think the message that Israel is sending to Gaza is, you're going to die, and your culture is going to die as long as you keep resisting. If you stop resisting, we'll let you stay in whatever conditions there are. But if you resist, zero tolerance, you die. And that, I think, is part of the reason why they're destroying way beyond the military necessity of getting at Hamas, houses, neighborhoods like Sajaria that I mentioned, whole cities. Gaza City is pretty much gone, and the Supreme Court, and artists, museums. A mosque, the oldest mosque in Gaza from the 13th century, was deliberately bombed last week. I mean, it had no military importance whatsoever. So they're going after these symbolic representations of Palestinianness, you see, in order to say to them, you are going to be Arabs. There is no Palestinian people. There will never be a Palestinian national expression in our Jewish country. And submitting means basically giving up your national identity and accept the fact in Israel that you're Israeli Arabs, or if you're in the occupied territory, that you're just Arabs. You cannot be Palestinians. And I think that's the message of the bombing of the artists and the Supreme Court and the mosques and the homes and so on. And finally, I want to wrap up here. As we've said, there is a lot of political organization around in the world around the Palestinian issue, and there's BDS and there's protests and lobbying days. I know the PSC does lobbying days in the UK and so on. But the question is, to what end? And again, I don't have time to get into this really, but the problem is that we don't have a political program. The Palestinians don't have a political program. The one-state program hasn't really been formulated. It doesn't have a critical mass of support yet. And therefore, the question is, towards what end? So you can go and say, we support Palestinian rights, but without a political program, it's very difficult to advance the Palestinian cause. I mean, what do you want? And that's the vacuum that we're trying to work with. That relates to the last point, to Colin's point, and that has to do with a peacekeeping force. The Palestinian Authority has asked at the UN just a few months ago for a protection force. I think a protection force is a better way to put it. In other words, not only protecting Palestinians from the settlers and the army today. I mean, there really is not just in Gaza, certainly there should be a protection force, but in the West Bank as well. But the Palestinians have been so oppressed by Israel and by the PA. Let me let my damn cat out of the He's not meowing at us. And the Palestinians have been so dispersed. So it's very hard for all the different communities to come together and communicate and come together around a political program that they need space. They need time. I don't know how much time, a year, 5 years, I don't know, but they need a space where they can, without this constant pressure of Israel and the settlers and the army and the Palestinian Authority on top of them as well, where they can sit back and begin to think about their future and a political program and communicate with each other, rebuild a PLO. They have no liberation organization today. There's a lot of leadership, but the PA prevents the leadership from emerging. And there's been no elections since 2006. If there were elections to a Palestinian National Council today, you'd have a myriad, a whole throng of new young leaders coming to the fore, but they're prevented from doing so today. But in order for all of that to happen, they have to have a kind of a protected space. They have to be able to keep Israel at bay, you know, the PA at bay, all these pressures so that they can really have time to get themselves together. And I think that would be a really important task of a protection force. Now, of course, the protection force has always been vetoed by the United States because Israel opposes it. The General Assembly could pass a resolution to accept it with a supermajority. The General Assembly can override the Security Council, but it's very hard to get to that supermajority. And I don't know if the attempt has been made. I don't think so. But at any rate, to put a protection force in the West Bank against Israel's will is really very, very difficult to do. So that I don't know if that is, I think that's an ask we should bring to our members of parliament, to our members of Congress or whatever, a protection force. And I think it's really needed, but I'm not sure if that's going to happen. All right, so that's pretty much the end of our time, I guess, and the end of the questions. I hope it's been a little bit stream of consciousness from neoliberalism down to the demolition of the Palestinian Supreme Court. But hopefully in here, you're beginning to get more of a critical Israeli view of what's going on. And I hope it's been useful.
Thank you so much, Jeff. That's wonderful. I'm just going to hand over to Anne Peacey, who's the president of the National Justice and Peace Network, to do a vote of thanks.
Yes, thank you for that. Chair of the National Justice and Peace Network in England and Wales, and it's been absolutely fantastic to be part of this event for two reasons. First of all, because it's such a critical issue. I mean, you mentioned we put on the news and we weep, we shout, we swear, we do all the things that we need to get out of our system, but at the end of it, we can still feel helpless and say, what on earth, in whoever's name, are we going to do about it? So I'll say a bit more about that later. But also, the second reason is because of a fantastic opportunity to explore the possibility of working in partnership with other groups and organizations, with peace and justice activists, because the more we work in partnership, the more we can say, well, here we are the alternative voice, and we demand to be heard. We are maybe the political outsiders. So thank you for that. And Linda, in her introduction, stressed the importance of collaboration, collaborative activities in order to make our voices heard, so we don't feel that we're voices crying in the wilderness, wondering what's happening to our children and our children's children. So I'd like to say thank you to Barbara for facilitating for us this Zoom meeting, because our Justice and Peace Network, we are privileged to have Barbara as a member of our executive, where we try to work with other people as well. And also like particularly to say thank you to Jeff for his insight, his passion, and his enthusiasm. And thank you again to all those who helped with all the techie stuff, which is beyond so many of us. That's the cloud of unknowing that we have no wish to penetrate, really. And most of all, thank you to everyone for spending the evening with us all in the attempt to find some hope. I'm not sure, listening to everything that Jeff was saying, it's very difficult to find hope in what seems an impossibly hopeless and complex situation. And the complexity of it's been made more to the front of us because putting the Israeli point of view, knowing how the media we know are the people with the power, and how we can sort of deal with such entrenched ideology. And so it's very difficult to find hope. But I think a sort of feeling of hope comes from putting upon us the massive responsibility and the huge challenge for each of us, particularly those of us who have had the opportunity to live a little and perhaps aren't struggling perhaps to find our own ideology, to sort of become more focused on the political agenda. And you've highlighted very much the fact that just lobbying and having a big slogan and going on a march where we come away with lots of buzz and lots of enthusiasm, but really putting on us the challenge to have a political agenda and to engage very much in that. So I see if we can all take that in board and share that with people that we know and we talk to and impress upon we've got to be involved in the political agenda, I think maybe that's where we'll begin to see signs of hope. So I just like to say thank you to everyone who facilitated this, and thank you to everybody who shared their questions and their time. And thank you again, just thank you to everybody. That's all I can say. It's given me so much to think about. As oldies hear so much about, you've got to get the young people involved. You've got to get the young people involved. And I think about my own children and grandchildren, that, as you say, they're so busy working to pay the mortgage, get the kids' homework done, take them to wherever they need to go. And I think we have to bring the responsibility back to ourselves. And so thank you for pointing that out to me anyway. So thank you to everyone, and good night.
Thank you for having me.
Oh,